Hi there, I'm reading Chapter 19 of Lila, An Inquiry into Morals by Robert M. Pirsig. It's dark out, Phaedrus thought. Beyond the large sliding glass doors of the hotel room, there was no trace of light left in the sky. All the light in the room came from the wall lamp, where the moth was still fluttering. He looked at his watch. His guest was late, about half an hour late. That was traditional for Hollywood celebrities. The bigger they are, the later they come, and this one, Robert Redford, was very big indeed. Phaedrus remembered that George Burns had joked that he'd been at Hollywood parties where the people were so famous they never showed up at all. But Redford was coming now to talk about film rights, and that was vital business. There was no reason to think he wouldn't be here. When Phaedrus heard the knock on the door, it had that special metallic sound of all the fireproof hotel doors in the world, but this time he was suddenly filled with tension. He got up, walked over to open it, and there in the corridor stood Redford with an expectant, unassuming look on his famous face. He seemed smaller than his film images had portrayed him to be. A golf cap covered his famous hair. Odd, rimless glasses drew attention away from the face behind them, and a turned-up jacket collar made him even more inconspicuous. Tonight he didn't look anything at all like the Sundance Kid. "Come on in," Phaedrus said, feeling a real wave of stage fright. This was suddenly real time. This was the present. It was as though this is opening night and the curtain had just gone up and everything is up to him now. He feels himself force a smile. He takes Redford's coat, tensely trying not to show his nervousness, being smooth about all this, but accidentally he bunches the coat in back, clumsily, so the kid has trouble getting one arm out. My God, he can't even get his arm out. Phaedrus lets go and the kid gets the coat off by himself and hands it to him with a questioning glance, then hands him the hat. What a start. Real Charlie Chaplin scene. Redford goes ahead into the sitting room, walks to the glass doors and looks over the park, apparently orienting himself. Phaedrus, who has followed behind, sits down in one of the overstuffed, silk-upholstered, gilded Victorian chairs they have put in this room. "Sorry to be late," Redford says. He turns from the glass doors and then, moving slowly at his own discretion, settles down on the opposing couch. "I just got in from Los Angeles half an hour ago," he says. "You lose 3 hours coming this way. At night they call it the red-eye flight." His eyes dart in for a reaction. Well named. You don't get any sleep at all. Redford is saying this, but as he is saying it, he is becoming somebody real. It's like the Purple Rose of Cairo, where a character comes off the screen and shares the life of one of the audience. What is he saying? "Every time I go back, I like it less," he says. "I grew up there, you know. I remember what it used to be like, and I resent what's happened to it." He keeps watching Phaedrus for reactions. "I still have a lot of beautiful memories from California," Phaedrus says, finally taking hold. "Did you live there?" "I lived next door once in Nevada," Phaedrus says. He is expected to speak. He speaks, a jumble of random sentences about California and Nevada. Deserts and pines and rolling hills, eucalyptus trees and freeways, and that sense of something missed, something unfulfilled, that he always gets when he is there. This is just filling time now, developing rapport. And as Redford listens intently, Phaedrus gets the feeling this is his normal habit. Real stage presence. He's just flown across the whole country, probably talked to a lot of people before that. Yet he sits right here with his famous face listening as though he had all the time in the world, as though nothing of any importance had occurred before he walked into this room, and nothing of importance was waiting for him after he walked out. The rambling goes on until a common point of connection is found in the name of Earl Warren, the former Supreme Court Justice, who Phaedrus said represents a kind of personality not too many people think of as Californian. Redford concurs wholeheartedly, revealing personal values. "He was our governor, you know," Redford says. Phaedrus says yes, and that Warren's family came from Minnesota. "Is that right?" Redford says. "I didn't know that." Redford says he's always had a special interest in Minnesota. His movie, Ordinary People, was a Minnesota story, although they filmed it in northern Illinois. His college roommate came from Minnesota, and he'd visited his house there and never forgotten it. "Where did he live?" Phaedrus asks. Lake Minnetonka, Redford says. Do you know that area? Sure, the first chapter of my book touched down for a second at Excelsior in Lake Minnetonka. Redford looks concerned, as though he missed an important detail. There's something about that area. I don't know what it is. There is a certain graciousness, Phaedra says. Redford nods, as though that is right on. There was a Minnesota neighborhood called Kenwood that was the same way. People there seemed to have that same Earl Warren charm, or graciousness, or whatever it was. Redford stares at him intensely for a moment. It's an intensity he never shows on the screen. What caused it? He asks. Money, Phaedra answered, but then realizing that isn't quite right, he adds, and something else too. Redford waits for him to continue. There was a lot of old wealth out there, Phaedra says, fortunes from lumber days and the early flour mill days. It was easier to be gracious when you had a maid and a chauffeur and 7 other servants running around the place. Did you live near Lake Minnetonka? No, nowhere close, but I used to go to birthday parties there in the 30s when I was a kid. Redford looks engrossed. Phaedra says, I wasn't one of the rich kids. I was on scholarship at a school in Minneapolis, where the rich kids went, by chauffeur usually. In the morning, these big, long, black Packard limousines would pull up outside the school, and a black uniformed chauffeur would jump out and dash around and open up the back door, and this little kid would pop out. In the afternoon, the limousines and chauffeurs would all be back again, and the kids would pop in, one kid to a limousine, and they'd all be off to Lake Minnetonka. I used to ride my bike to school, and sometimes I'd see in the mirror one of these big Packards was coming up behind me, and I'd turn and wave to the kid inside, and he'd wave back, and sometimes the chauffeur would wave too. And the funny thing is, I always knew that kid was the one who envied me. I had all the freedom. He was a prisoner in the back of that black Packard, and he knew it. What school was that? Blake. Redford's eyes became intense. That's the school my roommate went to. Small world, Phaedra says. It certainly is. Redford's excitement indicates something has connected here, a high spot in the surface of things that indicates some important structure underneath. I still have kind memories of it, Phaedra says. Redford looks as though he would listen some more, but that, of course, is not why he was here. After some more conversations about desultory subjects, he comes to the matter at hand. He pauses, then says, I guess I should say, first of all, that I admire your book greatly and feel challenged and stimulated by it. The ideas about quality are what I've always thought. I've always done it that way. I first read it when it first came out and would have contacted you then, but was told that someone else had already bought it. A funny woodenness had crept into his speech, as though he had rehearsed all this. Why should he sound like a poor actor? I really would like to have the film rights to this book, Redford says. You've got them, Phaedra says. Redford looks startled. Phaedra must have said something wrong. Redford's biography said he was unflappable, but he looks flapped now. I wouldn't have gotten this involved if I hadn't intended to give it to you, Phaedra said. But Redford doesn't look overjoyed. Instead, he looks surprised and retreats to somewhere inside of himself. His engrossment is gone. He wants to know what the previous film deals were. It's had quite a history, Phaedra said, and he relates a succession of film options that have been sold and allowed to lapse for some reason or another. Redford is back to his former self, listening intently. When that subject is covered, they turn cautiously to the question of how the book will be treated. Redford recommends a writer whom Phaedra has already met. Phaedra says okay. Redford wants to make full use of a scene where a teacher faces a classroom of students for a whole hour and says nothing, until by the end of the hour they are so tense and frightened they literally run for the door. Apparently he wants to build the story in terms of flashbacks within that scene. Phaedra thinks that sounds very good. It is remarkable the way Redford is homed in on the book. For that scene, he completely bypasses all the road scenes, all the motorcycle maintenance, where other scriptwriters have bogged down, and goes right to the classroom, which is where the book started, as a little monograph on how to teach English composition. Redford says that the road scenes will be made on location. He says that Phaedra can visit the sets whenever he wants to, but not every day. Phaedra doesn't know what this involves. The central problem of abstract ideas comes up. The book is largely about philosophic ideas about quality. Big commercial films don't show ideas visually. Redford says you have to condense the ideas and show them indirectly. Phoedrus is not sure what that means. He would like to see how this is going to be done. Redford senses Phoedrus's doubts and warns that, no matter how the film is done, you won't like it. Phoedrus wonders if he says this just to keep himself covered. Redford talks about how the author of another book he filmed saw the movie and tried to like it, but you could see that there was no enthusiasm there. That was hard to take, Redford says, and then adds, but that's the way it always seems to happen. Other subjects come up, but they don't seem to be quite to the point. Eventually, Redford looks at his wristwatch. Well, I guess there are no big problems at this point, he says. I'll go ahead and call the writer and see where he's at on this. He sits forward. I'm really tired, he says, and there's no point in romancing you all night about this. I'll call the others, and then sometime after that, our agency will get in touch with you. He gets up, goes to the hall closet, and by himself gets his cap and his coat. At the door, he says, Where are you living now? In my boat, down on the river. Oh, is there any way of reaching you there? No, I'll be gone tomorrow. I'm trying to get south before it freezes around here. Well, we'll contact you through your lawyer then. At the door, he adjusts his hat and glasses and jacket. He says goodbye, turns and moves down the corridor with tense springiness like a skier or a cat, or like the Sundance Kid, and vanishes around the corner. Then the corridor becomes just another hotel corridor again.